So let's get started. So first matchup we're gonna go over, as Brian alluded to, we're gonna start with the Suns and Clippers matchup. So I think as everyone has seen, the Clippers were able to steal Game One from the Suns. Definitely really a pretty big surprise in my opinion. I felt like they should have won based on the injuries the Clippers have experienced and the Suns being healthy. To be quite frank. So let's get started, Brian. So I guess Brian, what are your thoughts on the series so far?
Yeah, so as far as the series goes, and we kind of discussed this during the regular season, is in game one, it was clear that the Suns and Monty Williams did not know what kind of rotations that they would run in the playoffs. And two, Ty Lue was very methodical of how he ran his defensive schemes. Um, for the first quarter and a half, he basically had Kawhi guarding like everyone in the Suns starting lineup. Like he literally had Leonard start off on Aiden for a few possessions. And then he moved him around to Chris Paul, to Booker, to like Durant. And towards the fourth quarter is when he really put Leonard on Durant the entire time. But what hampered the Suns in game one was basically they didn't know their rotations, and the defensive schemes that the Clippers ran really confused them. Like what I mean by the Suns didn't know what kind of rotations to run, when they basically played all of their starters except for Chris Paul for the majority of the first quarter, and they played Durant and Booker for the full first quarter. And then in Q2, they basically had Booker and four bench players. And when they went with that lineup, the Clippers basically just doubled Booker. He gave the ball to whoever was on the court with him, whether it was Shamit, whether it was Craig, whether it was TJ Warren, whoever it was, and they couldn't do anything with the ball. They couldn't dribble, drive, shoot, whatever. And the Clippers would recover in time after Booker would give up the ball, and that's when the Clippers would just get stops and can score on the other end, right? So that's basically what the Clippers did, and that's how they got the lead in game one, and that's basically how they won game one. Now, in game two, what Monty did differently was he never allowed two of his three star perimeter players to be on the bench at the same time. Like at least Booker and Paul, at least Booker and Durant, at least Durant and Paul were always on the floor at the same time. There was not just one of them on the floor, right? So first quarter and third quarter, Booker and Durant played the entire quarters, and they only rested for 1.5 minutes for both Q2 and Q4 as well. Um, and one thing that's very different than what the Suns do compared to every other playoff team, and this is kind of why I don't think the Suns can sustain a long 2 month playoff run, is that they play all of their starters, excluding Aiden because Aiden got into foul trouble. They play all their starters into the 3 minute mark without any substitutions, right? If you look at most other teams, usually by the 6 minute mark, they sub out one star, they sub out, their bigs or whatnot. They all, and then because like to take the Warriors, Steph basically goes out of the game at the 6 minute mark for the first and third quarter, and he plays the entire second and fourth quarter. And Clay basically does the opposite. He plays the entire, first and third quarter. He plays for half of the Q2 and Q4. The Suns can't do that because they don't have enough depth. So they basically just play their star players the majority of the time, right? But having said all that, because they were hitting shots, and because they didn't stagger the stars as much as game one, they were able to get in the lead in this game and basically win out. Now, having said all that, I don't know if they can sustain that like long term. I think they can sustain it long enough to win the series in 6 or 7 games, but it's pretty clear that off of these 2 games, it's pretty clear that if the Clippers have Paul George, they would win, right? And it's pretty clear that too that the Suns cannot play this way they for 2 months. They can't have Durant and Booker playing 45 minutes for 2 months, and Chris Paul can't be playing 38, 39 minutes for 2 months as well, and they could be successful. So that was basically my take on the first 2 games of the series so far.
I know I completely agree with you. So I think one of the biggest things that I've noticed between these two teams is just the bench play, right? As you mentioned
Yeah.
earlier with the Suns, from at least from what we've seen so far in game one and game two, is that they heavily utilize their starters too much to where they're playing over 40 minutes. And over time, they're gonna get exhausted and tired, and then what are you gonna do? Like, you're gonna throw in players who barely get minutes, so they're not necessarily warmed up or ready to play in a big time playoff situation, right? And so when they don't have that experience, and also you're not giving the stars enough rest, like, it's a recipe for disaster long term.
Yeah.
Which, and to be fair, this is playoff basketball, so this is something that you're going to see relatively often. But even then, usually in the playoffs, you'll at least have, like, most teams are going to have at least like a 7 to 8 man rotation, right? It's not just five, five and maybe six players. You at least want an 8 man rotation, so that you're able to give stars rest, but also put yourself in a position to potentially win games, right? So
Yeah.
What the Clippers do have, I think, as we talked about in our previous podcast, is that the Clippers are a very deep team despite losing a key piece in Paul George.
Yeah.
And so
So
they're able to. Oh, go ahead.
yeah, so let me pick it off. Let me pick it off of two things you said that were very key. So one is you mentioned the minutes, right? The stars players. So particularly for Chris Paul and Devin Booker, they have a long history of muscle injuries, like soft tissue injuries, like hamstrings and calves and whatnot. Even this year, like Booker missed almost 2 months with just hamstring injuries, right? So playing long minutes, heavy minutes in the playoffs, eventually something's going to happen, especially for players who have a injury history of soft tissues. And the second point to your point about the minutes for the bench, which you outlined, in game one, only one bench player played more than 8 minutes. And in game two, only three players played more than 8 minutes, but Biombo had to play more than that just because Aiden got into foul trouble. So I'm not even sure if that counts. Right. So to your point, like, the Suns don't really have like a solidified 8-man lineup or 8-man rotation for the playoffs just yet. I think they're still trying to figure it out. But just wanted to piggyback off of those 2 points that you made.
No, absolutely. I mean, the only guy they played a good amount in game one, I believe, was Shamit, who played, I believe, 24 minutes, but he only scored 4 points. And considering his role as a shooter, that's not going to work out in the playoffs when you're playing a guy 24 minutes and they only have 4 points. You have to get more production from him and just the bench in general, and just utilize the players that you have on your team. Because again, I just can't imagine with folks like CP3 and Booker's injury history, like, you can't keep. You're just going to wear them out throughout the playoffs.
Yeah.
Now, I still personally, I don't know if I may or may not be correct. I still think the Suns can pull this off just because there's pure talent, right? They're just a better team than the Clippers. They're still fresh, relatively fresh. So they should be able to beat the Clippers, but whoever they face next, or even if they make it past them in the Western Conference Finals, it's going to be a real tough time going against a team that probably has a deeper rotation.
Yeah. So just to kind of, again, piggyback off what you're saying, hypothetically speaking, even if the Suns beat the Clippers, more than likely it will probably be at least 6 games, considering how the first 2 games have gone. More than likely, the Nuggets, at worst, they'll win in 5 games. At worst, I feel like they might even sweep, but at worst, they'll win in 5 games against the Wolves. Like if you watch the Nuggets against the Wolves, which we're not going to talk about just because it's not really worth talking about. But just to give you an idea, like, Gobert and Towns have no idea how to guard Jokic, and then the other one has to guard Gordon, who's just moving around the perimeter the entire time, and it looks really awkward for Towns or Gobert to guard Gordon on the perimeter. And basically the Wolves don't really have a defensive scheme that's going to work against the Nuggets, at least from what I saw. Not only like in game one, but also like the regular season. So honestly, that series should end in 5 games. Now, the reason why, and again, I don't want to get too ahead of myself, is the reason why I don't see the Suns going far in the playoffs, why they may even lose in the second round, is one, assuming that the Nuggets finish their series against the Wolves sooner. If and when the Suns finish off the Clippers, they have to move straight into round 2 without much rest, like 1 or 2 days at most. Right. And what makes Denver very similar to the Clippers is their depth. They have a lot of depth, and particularly on the perimeter. Now they don't have anyone as good as Kawhi from a defensive standpoint, but they have a lot of perimeter players that they can throw at Durant and Booker, right? Whereas Aaron Gordon, whether it's Bruce Brown, whereas KCP, so on and so forth, right? So they have those perimeter players to throw at the Suns, and they have a lot of depth. So similar issues to what the Suns are dealing with the Clippers, they're going to deal with similar issues when if and when they play the Nuggets, and then they're more likely to have less rest. So it's hard to really see if the Suns can get past even the Nuggets after if and when they get past the Clippers. But don't want to get too ahead of ourselves. But that's just kind of my early thought process as I watched these first two games.
Yep, I would agree. More than likely, the Nuggets are going to beat out the T Wolves, but never say never. So we're just gonna have to see what happens. But I do agree with your take there.